3 taxi drivers looked at the old man bleeding on the cobblestones, and they all said the same thing. Not with their mouths, with their hands on the steering wheel, with the small motion of pulling away. They drove past him. The first one saw the dust on his coat and the matted hair and the eyes that did not seem to be focused on anything in this world. He drove away. The second one saw the same thing 2 minutes later and made the same calculation. This is a beggar. This is trouble. This is not a fare. He drove away. The third one came closest. The third one actually stopped for a second and looked. And then he too pressed the pedal and disappeared down the Gran Via toward the harbor. And the old man was left lying on the tracks of the number 30 tram in the warm Barcelona twilight of the 7th of June, 1926. The old man was the most celebrated architect in Europe. The old man had personally drawn every column, every spiral staircase, every twisted iron railing, every fragment of broken ceramic mosaic of the most ambitious cathedral begun in 800 years. The old man was Antoni Gaudí. And the city he had given his entire life to could not recognize him on its own street. I want you to sit with that for a moment before we go any further, because this is not a story about a great man. There are 1,000 stories about great men. This is a story about a city that ate a great man and then put up signs charging tourists 26 euros to walk through his bones. This is a story about how genius dresses and what happens to genius when it forgets to dress like genius. This is a story about the 7 wounds that were carved into one body across 73 years until the body could not run fast enough to get out of the way of a tram. My name is Mortimer Quill. I work in an archive that is not in any catalog. The doors do not open from the outside. The papers in this archive are not the papers historians pull from official boxes. They are the papers that were almost burned, almost lost, almost forgotten. The papers that survive only because someone, somewhere, was too tired to throw them in the fire on the day they were ordered to. In front of me on the table tonight, there is a folded blueprint. The paper is cream-colored, brittle at the corners, with a brown stain across the lower right edge that the archivists used to insist was coffee, but which is, when you look at it under a strong lamp, almost certainly blood. The blueprint is signed in pencil in a slanted hand at the bottom. Antoni Gaudí, 1895. It is one of the working drafts for the nativity facade of the Sagrada Família. It has 7 creases in it. 7 folds where the paper has been opened and closed and opened again so many times that the fibers have given up. 7 creases. 7 wounds. Tonight, you and I are going to follow each crease. We are going to open this drawing one fold at a time, and at each fold, we are going to step into a moment in the life of the man who held this paper, and we are going to ask the only question that matters about a human being who is allowed to die alone in a third-class hospital bed at the age of 73. What did the world take from him to make him into what he became? And what did he give back? And was the trade fair? The trade was not fair. I will tell you that now. Nothing about this story is fair, but it is true, and the truth is worth more than fairness on a night like this. So lean forward. The lamp is on, the folder is open. Let us begin with the first crease. The first crease is the body, not the cathedral, not the city. The body of a small boy in a stone village in 19th century Catalonia who could not run. The boy was born in the town of Reus on the 25th of June, 1852, in a stone house with a copper workshop attached to the side. His father, Francesc Gaudí i Serra, was a coppersmith. His mother, Antonia Cornet i Bertran, came from a family of coppersmiths. His grandfather had been a coppersmith. The whole back wall of the family had been bent over hammered metal for 3 generations. They made cauldrons. They made stills for the wine and brandy makers of the region. They made the round forms that you needed when you wanted to hold liquid, and they understood, in their hands and in the muscles of their forearms, how a flat sheet of copper could be coaxed into a curve. This matters. Remember this. The boy who could not run was raised by men who spent their entire lives turning straight lines into curves. Antoni was the youngest of 5 children. 2 of the 5 had already died by the time he could walk. The mortality rate of children in 19th century rural Catalonia was such that to be the youngest of 5 was to be the youngest of an already thinned herd. He was a small child, thin, with watery eyes. By the age of 6, he had developed what the family doctor of Reus called rheumatism. We do not know exactly what the boy had. Modern researchers have suggested everything from juvenile rheumatoid arthritis to a form of chronic brucellosis from unpasteurized milk. The label does not matter. The result mattered. The result was that the boy could not run with the other children. The boy could not climb. The boy could not stand for long periods of time. There were days when the boy could not get out of bed. There were weeks when the boy could not get out of the house. While his older brothers chased each other through the dust of Reus and threw stones at lizards on the stone walls and learned to box and fight and shout, Antoni Gaudí sat in a chair by a window and watched. Now, listen to me very carefully, because this is the moment that everything changes. A normal child, a child of a different temperament, would have looked out of that window and seen only what he could not have. He would have grown bitter. He would have grown small. He would have learned that the world was a place that excluded him, and he would have spent the rest of his life seeking small revenges against it. The boy in the chair did something else. The boy in the chair began to look very, very carefully at things he was allowed to look at. He looked at the leaves of the fig tree in the courtyard. He noticed that no leaf was a flat shape. Every leaf was a curve, gently dished like a hand cupping water. He looked at the snail crawling along the windowsill and noticed that the spiral of its shell was not random. It followed a strict mathematical rule, a rule that he could not yet name, but that he could feel in his eyes. He looked at the bones of a dead sparrow that the cat had left on the patio and noticed that the bones were not solid. The bones were hollow on the inside, with thin internal walls running diagonally to keep them strong. He looked at the trunk of the old olive tree at the edge of the family land and noticed that it twisted as it rose, as if it were turning to keep a secret. He looked, and he looked, and he looked, for years. The boy who could not run looked at the world the way no one else around him was looking at it. He saw that nature did not build with straight lines. Nature did not square corners. Nature did not lay one stone flatly upon another stone. Nature curved. Nature spiraled. Nature dished and arched and twisted and flowed. Nature was lazy in the most beautiful possible way. It always took the path of least resistance, and the path of least resistance was almost always a curve. While the other children of Reus were learning the alphabet and getting whipped for spelling errors, Antoni Gaudí was doing something more important. He was getting his graduate degree in the geometry of the natural world from a chair next to a window, paid for by an illness no one could cure. Mark this, ins to show symptoms. By the age of 25, Francesc will be dead. By the age of 23, Antoni's mother will also be dead. The house will empty out one body at a time. By the time Antoni is in his early 30s, every member of the family who shared his childhood will be in the ground except for one niece, Rosa, the daughter of his dead sister, a sickly girl whom he will take in and try to raise, and who will herself die young of alcoholism and grief in his rooms in Barcelona. You hear me? You are listening to me? I want you to understand the shape of the life we are looking at. Antoni Gaudí does not arrive in Barcelona as a normal young man with a normal family behind him. Antoni Gaudí arrives in Barcelona as the last surviving member of a wiped-out household, a limping young man in cheap clothes, carrying a head full of fig leaves and snail shells and twisted olive trunks, and a body that hurts every time it rains. He is 17 years old. The year is 1869. He has come to enroll in the Escola Técnica Superior d'Arquitectura. Open the second crease. The second crease is the school of monsters, as I called it on the title card, and you will understand why I called it that in about 90 seconds. Barcelona in 1869 is not the Barcelona you know. The Barcelona you know, the elegant grid of the Eixample, the wide boulevards, the orderly blocks with their cut corners. That Barcelona is being built right now, in front of the young Antoni's eyes, by the engineer Ildefons Cerdà. The medieval walls of the city were torn down only 15 years before. The city is exploding outward. There is dust everywhere. There are construction sites everywhere. There are foremen and cart drivers and Italian bricklayers and Catalan carpenters and Basque foundry workers all swarming over the new boulevards. And into this swarm walks a thin, limping young man with watery eyes and a worn leather portfolio under his arm. And nobody notices him at all. He should have been crushed. He should have been one more provincial boy who came to the city, failed his exams, and went back to Reus to make copper pots. There are tens of thousands of those boys. History does not remember them. They are the dust the boulevards were built on. But Antoni Gaudí had something the other boys did not have. He had 8 years of looking at fig leaves while sitting in a chair. He had the spiral of the snail shell carved into his retinas. He had a database of natural form inside his head that was richer and stranger and more useful than anything being taught in any architectural school in Europe. He did terribly in his exams. Listen to me. He did terribly. He failed courses. He passed others by the skin of his teeth. His marks in mathematics were mediocre. His marks in history of architecture were average. His marks in religion, and religion was a required subject, were poor, because the young Antoni at this stage of his life was something close to a free thinker, something close to an anti-clerical Catalan nationalist, something very far from the half-saint the Vatican is currently trying to canonize. But in the studio courses, in the design courses, in the drawing courses, the young Antoni did things that made his professors stop in the corridor and stare at the wall. He did not draw buildings the way the other students drew buildings. The other students drew Greek temples and neoclassical facades and proper symmetrical Beaux-Arts compositions, the way they had been taught for 200 years all over Europe. Antoni Gaudí drew buildings that looked like they had grown out of the ground. He drew columns that leaned. He drew arches that bent like the ribs of a horse. He drew stairs that spiraled like the inside of a seashell. He drew vaults that imitated the underside of mushrooms. His professors did not know what to do with him. There is a story. I cannot prove the story. The story is told in 3 different versions, in 3 different memoirs of 3 different people who all studied at the school in those years, which means either it really happened or it became a legend that everyone wanted to have witnessed. The story is this. On the day Antoni Gaudí received his architecture diploma, in March of 1878, the director of the school, Elias Rojan i Amat, signed the paper, handed it across the desk, looked at the young man with the limp and the watery eyes, and said, "I do not know if I have just given this title to a madman or to a genius. Time will tell." Time told, but it took time decades to do it, and by the time time had told, it was already too late for the man. In the same year, 1878, the brand new architect, 26 years old, broke, unknown, walking with a cane on bad days, designed the street lamps that today still stand on the Plaça Real in the center of Barcelona. They have 6 arms. They are topped with the winged helmet of Mercury. They are made of cast iron, and they were laughed at when they were unveiled by half the Barcelona press, who said the young architect was attempting to put medieval armor on top of gas lamps. Today, tens of thousands of tourists photograph these lamps every week, and not 1 in 100 knows the name of the man who designed them. That is the rhythm of the life of Antoni Gaudí. Every project is laughed at when it is built. Every project is sacred ground 100 years later. Every laugh that hurt him in the moment was repaid by a tourist ticket booth that cashes in on his bones. But we are getting ahead. We are at the 2nd crease still. Open the 3rd. The 3rd crease is the moment Antoni Gaudí stops being an architect like all the other architects of the 19th century and becomes the only architect of his kind in human history. The year is 1883. He is 31 years old. He has just been introduced to a man named Eusebi Güell. Eusebi Güell is a textile industrialist, the richest man in Catalonia, a polyglot, a reader, a connoisseur, a count. He has just returned from a trip to Paris, where he has seen, at the Universal Exposition, a small piece of furniture, a glass display case for a glove shop, designed by an unknown Catalan architect. The display case has a kind of organic, sinuous quality that nothing else in the exposition has. Güell asks who designed it. He is told it was an architect named Gaudí from Reus. Güell returns to Barcelona and he sends for the young man. Their meeting becomes the most important friendship in the history of European architecture. Without Güell, there would be no Gaudí. Without Güell's money, his contacts, his patience, his willingness to pay for projects that other rich men would have considered insane, the body of work that the world calls Gaudí simply does not exist. Eusebi Güell is the patron of patrons. He is the one rich man in 19th century Spain who looked at a thin, limping young architect with strange ideas about curves and snails and fig leaves and said, "I will pay for whatever you can imagine." The work begins to flow. Casa Vicens, the first major commission, a summer house for a tile manufacturer named Manuel Vicens y Montaner. Gaudí takes the commission and produces a building unlike anything that has ever existed in Spain, a building covered in green and white ceramic tiles in checkerboard patterns, with iron palm leaf gates, with brick towers that reference the Mudéjar Islamic tradition of southern Spain, with dining rooms whose ceilings imitate hanging fronds of ivy. It is finished in 1888. The architectural press of Barcelona calls it, quote, 1, quote, 2, quote, 3. Today, it is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and tickets cost 21 euros. Parc Güell. A failed real estate development in the hills above Barcelona, Eusebi Güell wants to build a garden city for the Catalan upper class. 60 plots of luxury housing on a steep hillside, each with views of the Mediterranean. Gaudí designs the entrance, the columns, the famous undulating bench encrusted with broken ceramic shards, the curving paths that wind up the slope. He works on it from 1899 to 1914. They sell 2 plots, 2 out of 60. The project is a catastrophic financial failure. Güell himself eventually moves into the show house, not because he wants to, but because nobody else will buy it. After Güell's death, the city of Barcelona buys the failed development for almost nothing and turns it into a public park. Today, it draws 9 million visitors a year, and it is one of the 3 most photographed places in Spain. Casa Batlló, 1877. Gaudí is hired by the textile industrialist Josep Batlló to renovate an existing apartment building on the Passeig de Gràcia. He does not renovate it. He turns it into a building that looks like the spinal column of a dragon, with a roof of iridescent broken tiles like fish scales, with bone-shaped balconies, with windows that look like the open mouths of bones. The neighbors of the Passeig de Gràcia file a formal complaint with the Barcelona City Council, calling the new facade an offense to public decency and good taste. Today, it costs 35 euros to enter, and the lines stretch around the block. La Pedrera, also called Casa Milà, 1906 to 1910. The most ambitious apartment building of his career. The wealthy industrialist Pere Milà commissions Gaudí to build a palatial apartment block on a corner of the Passeig de Gràcia. Gaudí produces a building whose facade looks like a wave of stone frozen mid-collapse, with iron balconies that look like seaweed, with chimneys on the roof that look like helmeted soldiers from another planet. The press of the time gives the building the mocking nickname La Pedrera, the quarry, because they say it looks like an unfinished mass of raw rock. Pere Milà's wife, Roser Seguimon, hates the building so much that after Gaudí's death, she has all the curving Gaudí furniture removed from her apartment and replaced with conventional furniture. She continues to live in the building. In a Gaudí structure she has stripped of every Gaudí element she could remove, until her own death. Today, La Pedrera is the corporate headquarters and museum of one of Spain's largest banks, and the rooftop is one of the most visited tourist attractions in Europe. Are you starting to see the pattern? Are you starting to feel the shape of it under your fingers, the way I feel it tonight in this room, with the lamp burning down and the blueprint open in front of me? Every single one of these buildings was hated when it was built. Every single one of these buildings is now sacred. Every single one of these buildings made other people rich after Antoni Gaudí was dead. That is the third crease. The straight line belongs to man. The curved line belongs to God. And the curve, eventually, always wins. But it never wins in time to help the person who drew it. Open the fourth crease. Slowly. This is the one I have been preparing you for. The fourth crease is the cathedral that ate him. The Sagrada Família was not Gaudí's idea. I want you to understand this. It was not his project. He inherited it. The original architect was a man named Francisco de Paula del Villar y Lozano, a competent but unremarkable diocesan architect who had been hired by a religious bookseller and conservative Catholic activist named Josep Maria Boccabella to build an expiatory temple, that is, a temple of atonement, a temple to be built entirely from private donations, as an act of penitence on behalf of all of Catalonia for what Boccabella saw as the sins of modernity, of industrialization, of the abandonment of God. Villar laid the first stone on March 19, 1882. He designed a conventional neo-Gothic cathedral. He worked on it for a little more than a year. Then he had a falling out with Boccabella over the design of the crypt. He resigned in a huff, and Boccabella was suddenly without an architect. Boccabella consulted his architectural advisor, an established figure named Joan Martorell, on whom to hire as a replacement. Martorell did not want the job himself. The salary was nominal, and the money for construction was uncertain. But Martorell had a young assistant in his studio who he thought might be willing to take it on. A strange, intense young man with very particular ideas. A young man named Antoni Gaudí. Gaudí accepted the commission in November of 1883. He was 31 years old. He did not yet know that he had just been handed the rest of his life. For the first decade, he worked on the Sagrada Família part-time while running his other commissions. He inherited Villar's neo-Gothic crypt and continued building it. Gaudí was respectful of his textbook in Europe could justify. By the early 1900s, Gaudí was working on the Sagrada Família more or less full-time. By 1914, after a series of personal catastrophes, including the death of his niece Rosa, and a deepening religious crisis that pushed him from his earlier free thinking into a fervid and ascetic Catholicism, he made a decision that would seal his fate. He stopped accepting any other commissions. He turned down everything. He turned down a commission to design a hotel in New York City in 1908 that would have made him richer than any architect in the world. He turned down commissions to build palaces, churches, monuments, public works. He told his patrons, his friends, his collaborators, the same sentence over and over again, with the calm patience of a man who has finally understood what he was put on this earth to do. I have only one client now, the poor of Barcelona, and one master, God. He moved his living quarters into the construction site itself. There was a small workshop building on the grounds of the Sagrada Família, and Gaudí had a single room in it. The room contained a narrow iron bed, a chair, a small table, a crucifix on the wall, and a bookcase. Nothing else. He slept there. He ate there. He prayed there. He woke up before dawn every day, walked across the construction yard with the dust still settling from the previous day's work, and climbed into the half-finished towers to inspect what the masons had done. He was not paid a fixed salary. The Sagrada Família was funded entirely by private donations from the Catholic faithful of Barcelona, and the donations came in irregularly. In good months, there was money for the workers. In bad months, there was no money at all, and Gaudí would suspend construction and walk through the streets of Barcelona in person, knocking on the doors of the wealthy, begging, literally begging, as a beggar begs, hat in hand, for funds to continue the work. He stopped paying attention to his own appearance. This is not a metaphor. Read me carefully. He stopped buying new clothes. He wore the same suits until they fell apart on his body. He patched them with whatever fabric came to hand. His shoes wore through, and he had them resoled with whatever leather scraps the workers gave him, until they barely held the shape of shoes. His shirt collars yellowed, his hair grew long, his beard grew long. He cut his own hair when he remembered to, and he often did not remember to. He ate almost nothing. The Catalan custom of the long afternoon meal, the social ritual of food and wine that organized the entire Mediterranean day, he abandoned it entirely. He carried a piece of bread in his pocket, and a few almonds, and a bunch of grapes, and he ate from his pocket while standing on scaffolding, while pointing at a column, while explaining to a young apprentice why the angle of a particular branch had to imitate the angle of a fig branch he remembered from a courtyard in Reus 70 years before. Friends who came to visit him at the workshop were horrified. They tried to bring him food. They tried to take him out to dinner. He refused. He had taken what was effectively a vow of poverty, although he had never formally entered any religious order. He lived inside the cathedral. He lived inside the cathedral the way a hermit lives inside a cave, and the cathedral, year by year, fed on him. This is the meta-turn of our story. Listen carefully. This is the moment the trade reveals itself for what it is. Stone got everything. The man got nothing. Stone got his time, his strength, his money, his eyesight. By his late 60s, he could barely read in dim light, and he was dependent on his apprentices to read documents to him. Stone got his social life, his romantic life. There is a story that, as a young man, he was in love with a woman named Pipetta Moreau, a teacher in the cooperative town of Mataró, that he proposed marriage to her, and that she turned him down because she had already promised herself to another man. We do not know if the story is true. We know that he never married, that he was never publicly known to have any romantic relationship of any kind for the rest of his life, and that whatever capacity for human love he possessed was, after that point, redirected entirely into stone. Stone got his health. The chronic rheumatism of his childhood never left him, and the working conditions of the Sagrada Família, the cold stone, the wind on the scaffolding, the long hours, the bad food, made it worse year by year. By his 60s, he walked with a permanent stoop. His joints were knotted and twisted. The hand he drew with was bent like a claw. Stone got his face, the face that the world remembers when it sees photographs of Antoni Gaudí, the long white beard, the wild gray hair, the deep eye sockets, the mouth half hidden by mustache. That is not the face he was born with. That is the face the cathedral carved into him, year by year, taking little chips of his flesh and his hair color and his upright posture, and using them to build the towers that today rise 470 feet over Barcelona. The cathedral was a great mouth. Antoni Gaudí walked into it freely, and the cathedral closed. By 1925, the Sagrada Família was approximately 25% built. The crypt was complete. The nativity facade was nearly complete, with 3 of its 4 bell towers finished, and the 4th nearly so. The interior was open sky. The vast nave had not yet been begun. The Passion facade had not been begun. The Glory facade, which was always intended to be the principal entrance, facing south, had not been begun. The central tower of Jesus, which was supposed to rise 560 feet, dominating the entire skyline of Barcelona, was a sketch on a sheet of paper. Gaudí knew. He knew with absolute certainty that he would not live to see the building completed. He had told his apprentices many times. He had said, "My client is in no hurry." By his client, he meant God. But there is one more thing he said in the last years that almost no one quotes, and that I want you to hear tonight, because it is the truest sentence of his life. He said it to his most trusted assistant, Domènec Sugranyes, on the steps of the workshop one evening in 1924. Sugranyes recorded it in his diary years later. The sentence was this: "I am building a temple that will outlast me by centuries, and I cannot build a chair that fits my own body. I have lost the proportions of my own life." Open the 5th crease. The 5th crease is the moment the man becomes invisible. By 1924, Antoni Gaudí is 72 years old. He has been working on the Sagrada Família for 41 years. He is, on paper, one of the most respected figures in Catalan public life. But he never goes to public functions, he never gives interviews, he never appears at the cultural events of the Catalan elite. He has not given a single public speech in 20 years. He communicates with the outside world only through a small circle of loyal apprentices, a handful of priests, and the donors who occasionally come to visit the construction site. The people of Barcelona, walking past the half-finished cathedral on their way to work, do not know what he looks like. There are very few photographs of him. The ones that exist were mostly taken by visiting journalists in his younger years. The old man who shuffles every evening from the cathedral to the church of Sant Felip Neri, where he goes daily to attend Mass and to say his prayers, that old man, in his patched suit and his ragged shoes, with his white beard halfway down his chest, walking with a cane and a stoop, has no public face attached to his private body. He looks, to anyone passing him on the street, exactly like a beggar. This is not me being colorful, this is documented. The diaries of his contemporaries mention it again and again. The writer Joseph Pla, who saw him several times in those years, described him in a memoir as looking like a tramp the police should have moved along. The journalist, who would later write his obituary in La Vanguardia, confessed that he had passed Gaudí on the street twice without recognizing him, and had wondered why such an unkempt old man was being allowed near the cathedral construction site. In May of 1926, Gaudí had an episode. He collapsed on the steps of the workshop. His apprentices put him to bed, and a doctor was called. The doctor diagnosed exhaustion, malnutrition, and a probable heart strain. The doctor ordered him to stop working immediately, to eat properly, and to rest for at least 6 months. Gaudí agreed to none of these things. He did, however, agree to one small concession. His doctor, his confessor at Sant Felip Neri, and his closest apprentice, Sugranyes, all begged him to take some time away from the cathedral. They begged him to at least consider a short trip, not a vacation, not a luxury, but a visit to the small town of Puigcerdà in the Pyrenees, where the air was clean and where he might recover his strength. Gaudí refused even this. But he agreed, finally, to begin keeping a more regular schedule. He agreed to walk to Sant Felip Neri every evening, a walk of about 1.5 kilometers for his daily Mass and confession, and to walk back. The walk would, in theory, give him some exercise and force him to take regular breaks from the workshop. It was this walk that killed him. Open the 6th crease. The 6th crease is the 7th of June, 1926, a Monday. The weather is warm. Barcelona is in early summer. At about 5:30 in the afternoon, Antoni Gaudí leaves the workshop of the Sagrada Família. He is wearing his usual clothes, a worn black suit, a frayed shirt, broken shoes, a soft black hat. He carries no identification. He never carried identification. Why would he? He believed he was known to everyone who needed to know him. He sets out on his usual route, down Carrer de Mallorca, across the avenues of the Eixample. He is heading southwest, towards Sant Felip Neri, in the medieval Gothic quarter of the city. The walk is approximately 1.5 kilometers. He has made it hundreds of times. Witnesses later said that he was walking more slowly than usual that evening. Witnesses later said, this part is in the official accident report, that he was crossing the Gran Via at the intersection with Carrer de Bailén. He was not in a marked crossing. There were no marked crossings in Barcelona in 1926 the way there are now. He was crossing where he had always crossed. The number 30 tram came down the Gran Via on its regular route. The driver, a man named Antoni Gaudí, was operating the tram on his standard schedule. He saw an old man in shabby clothes step out into the tracks. He sounded the bell. He could not stop in time. The tram struck Gaudí and threw him to the cobblestones. The tram driver did not stop. I am going to say that again because I need you to hear it. The tram driver did not stop. The tram driver continued on his route, looked back over his shoulder once, saw a small crowd beginning to form around what looked like a heap of rags on the cobblestones, and continued to the next stop. He filed an accident report at the end of his shift. The accident report listed the victim as an elderly indigent. Gaudí lay on the cobblestones, bleeding from the back of his head. He was conscious, but he could not get up. His left side was paralyzed, probably from a fractured rib pressing on a nerve. He tried to speak. The witnesses who gathered around him said later that they could not understand what he was saying. He was speaking in fragments. They thought he was a drunk. A civil guard officer arrived. He looked at the old man on the cobblestones. He saw the shabby suit, the ragged shoes, the long beard, the dirty hat. He saw a beggar who had been hit by a tram. He flagged down a passing taxi, the first taxi. The driver of the first taxi rolled down his window. He looked at the bleeding old man on the ground. He looked at the civil guard officer, and he said, and this is recorded in the official accident inquiry that took place a week later, he said, "I am not putting that in my car. He will bleed all over the upholstery and ruin the seats." He drove away. The civil guard officer flagged down a second taxi. 2 minutes pass. An old man with a fractured skull is bleeding on the cobblestones in the heart of the most prosperous city in Spain, and a uniformed officer of the law is standing over him, waving down passing vehicles. The second driver also looks. The second driver also makes the calculation. The second driver also drives away. The third taxi stops fully. The driver gets out, looks at the body, looks at the officer, asks who is going to pay. The officer says the city will pay. The man is injured. This is a public matter. The driver says he wants the money in advance. The officer does not have money in advance. The driver gets back into his taxi and drives away. 3 taxis, 3 refusals. The most celebrated architect in Europe is bleeding on the street, and 3 men in 3 vehicles have looked at him and decided that his life is not worth the upholstery. Eventually, a 4th driver agrees to take him, but not to the nearest hospital, which would have been the private and well-equipped hospital clinic. The driver refuses to go there because he fears that a private hospital will refuse to admit a patient who looks like a beggar, and then the driver will be stuck with the body. Instead, he takes Gaudí to the Hospital de la Santa Creu, the old charity hospital in the Raval district, the hospital that took in the indigent poor of Barcelona, the place where the unidentified and the unwanted went to die. He is admitted at approximately 7 in the evening. The ward attendant takes one look at his clothes and assigns him to a 3rd-class bed in a public ward. He is examined by a junior doctor on duty. The diagnosis? Severe cranial trauma, fractured ribs, internal bleeding, possible concussion-related neurological damage. The doctor cleans the wounds, bandages the head, and writes in the admission ledger the only identification he has been able to extract: anciano indigente, elderly indigent. Now I want you to picture what is happening in the workshop of the Sagrada Família at this exact same moment. It is approximately 7 in the evening. The workers are leaving. The apprentices are closing the doors. Someone notices that the master has not returned from his evening walk. He always returns by 6. It is now 7. He is over an hour late. Sugranes, his closest assistant, sends a young apprentice to the church of Sant Felip Neri to look for him. The apprentice runs the 1.5 kilometers to the church. The priest at Sant Felip Neri tells him that the master never arrived. He was expected for confession. He never came. The apprentice runs back. Sugranes is now seriously alarmed. He sends out 3 more apprentices in 3 different directions to retrace the route the master might have taken. They search until midnight. They find nothing. Nobody at the police station has any record of an accident involving Gaudí. Nobody at the hospitals. They check the major private hospitals first, of course. The clinic and the Sagrat Cor has any record of admitting him. Open the 7th crease, the last one, the deepest one. It takes them almost 24 hours to find him. For nearly an entire day, while the most famous architect in Europe lies in a 3rd-class charity bed with a fractured skull, his apprentices and his friends and his patrons are tearing the city apart looking for him. They check every police station, every hospital, every monastery. They begin to fear he has been kidnapped. They begin to fear he has fallen into the harbor. They begin to fear he has had a stroke and is lying somewhere in an alley. He is 20 minutes walk from the workshop in a public ward, marked as anciano indigente. The next day, the 8th of June, in the late morning, one of the apprentices, a young man named Francesc Quintana, who would himself later become the chief architect of the Sagrada Família after Gaudí's death, finally thinks to check the charity hospital, almost as an afterthought, almost ashamed to be looking for his master in a place for the destitute. He walks into the Hospital de la Santa Creu. He asks the ward attendant if any unidentified elderly men have been admitted in the last day. The attendant says yes. An old beggar was hit by a tram yesterday. He is in the third-class ward. He has not regained full consciousness. Do you wish to identify him? Quintana is taken into the ward. I want you to imagine this scene with me. I want you to stand in this room and feel the air of it. The ward is long and narrow. There are perhaps 20 beds arranged along the walls, separated by small curtains. The beds are iron. The mattresses are thin. The smell, and I will not spare you this, because the truth of this moment is in its smell. The smell is the smell of a charity ward in 1926. It is the smell of unwashed bodies, of cheap disinfectant, of urine that has been allowed to soak into the floor, of dying men. There are flies. The light comes through high windows that have not been cleaned in a generation. The nuns in their gray habits move from bed to bed with basins of water and rough cloths. Quintana walks past the beds. He looks at each face. Most of the men are unconscious or barely conscious, their eyes turned to the ceiling, their breath rattling. Some are very old. Some have the look that men get just before they die, that distant, patient look, the look of a body that is no longer waiting for anything but the end. He reaches the bed at the far end of the ward. He looks down. He sees a thin old man with a long white beard, his head wrapped in a bandage that is brown with dried blood, his eyes half closed, his hands resting on the rough sheet. Quintana drops to his knees by the bed. It is Gaudí. It is the master. The most celebrated architect in Spain, the man who has dined with the king, the man who has been written about in Paris and London and Vienna, the man whose buildings draw foreign visitors to Barcelona by the trainload, that man is lying in a third-class charity bed with a tag around his wrist that says, Anciano Indigente. Quintana runs. He runs to the office of the hospital director. He explains who the patient is. The hospital director does not believe him. Quintana has to insist. He has to describe the buildings. He has to show his own architect's identification. Eventually, the director comes to the ward, looks at the old man, and goes pale. The hospital tries to move him. They want to transfer him immediately to a private room, to a better ward, to the hospital clinic, anywhere. They begin making arrangements. Gaudí, who has regained partial consciousness by this time, refuses. He refuses with the last clarity of mind he has left. He says, and this is recorded by the nun who was attending him at that moment, Sister Manuela, in her testimony to the canonization inquiry decades later, he says, he stays. He dies there. 2 days later, on the evening of the 10th of June, 1926, Antoni Gaudí dies in a third-class charity bed in the Hospital de la Santa Creu of the injuries inflicted by Tram number 30, 3 days after being struck. He receives the last rites from a priest sent by his friend, the Bishop of Vic. He is conscious for parts of those final 2 days. And friends and apprentices and patrons are finally allowed in to see him. The young king, Alfonso XIII, sends a personal message of concern. The Catalan press, alerted at last to what has happened, begins to print outraged editorials about the failure of the city to recognize and protect its great man. It is too late. He dies. He is 73 years old. Now we come to the cynical finale. Listen to me very carefully. Listen to what the city of Barcelona did the moment they realized whose body was lying in that charity ward. They held a state funeral. Not a private funeral, not a quiet funeral. A funeral that was, by every account of every newspaper that covered it, the largest funeral procession in the history of Barcelona to that date. Tens of thousands of people lined the streets. The procession moved from the Hospital de la Santa Creu through the Gothic quarter, up the Via Laietana, along the Gran Via, past the spot where the tram had struck him only days before, and finally to the Sagrada Família, where he was to be buried in the crypt of the cathedral that had eaten his life. The Pope sent special permission for the burial inside the cathedral, because canon law normally forbids burials inside churches, but for this man, an exception was made. The civil authorities decreed a day of mourning. The press, which had mocked his every building for 40 years, now wrote eulogies calling him, quote, 13, quote, 14, quote, 15, quote. They did not recognize him. That is the only honest sentence in any of those eulogies. They did not recognize him on the street. They did not recognize him in the taxi. They did not recognize him on the cobblestones. They did not recognize him in the hospital bed. They recognized him only when he was a corpse, because a corpse is easier to love than a living genius. A corpse does not embarrass you with its shabby clothes and its strange theories about curves. The same press that had called La Pedrera, quote, 16, now called him, quote, 17. The same neighbors of the Passeig de Gracia who had filed complaints against the Casa Batlló now lined the route of the funeral procession in their best mourning clothes. The same wealthy citizens who had refused to donate to the cathedral construction during his lifetime now opened their checkbooks for monuments and plaques and commemorative coins. The 3 taxi drivers who had refused him, by the way, what happened to them? You want to know? I will tell you. Nothing. Nothing happened to them. There was a brief judicial inquiry. They were identified, they were questioned. 2 of them said they had not realized the seriousness of the injury. One of them admitted he had refused because the man __quote_18_. None of them was charged with any crime. None of them lost their license. They went on driving their taxis. They went on living their lives. Their names were quietly dropped from the public record, and within a year, nobody outside of a few historians remembered who they were. The tram driver, Antoni Gaudí, was briefly suspended. He was quickly reinstated. He went on driving the number 30 tram. He died in the 1940s of natural causes. The Sagrada Família continued to be built, slowly, with many interruptions. The Spanish Civil War broke out a decade later, in 1936, and during the chaos of the early days of the war, anarchist militants broke into Gaudí's workshop and destroyed almost all of his original drawings, models, and plans. They burned them, they smashed the plaster models, they scattered the papers in the dust. The cathedral architects who came after Gaudí had to reconstruct his designs from memory, from photographs, from the few fragments that were saved by Sugrañes and Quintana, hiding them in their homes. The cathedral continued to be built throughout the 20th century. Slowly, generation after generation of architects continued the work. Money came and went, construction sped up and slowed down. Tourists began to come, tickets began to be sold. By the year 2000, the Sagrada Família was the most visited monument in Spain. By the year 2010, Pope Benedict XVI came personally to consecrate the cathedral as a basilica. By the year 2025, the central tower of Jesus, which Gaudí had drawn on a sheet of paper a century before, finally began to rise to its full height of 560 feet, becoming the tallest church in the world. The Vatican has opened the formal process for Antoni Gaudí's canonization. He has been declared a servant of God. The next stage is beatification. After that, sainthood. If the process is completed, he will become Saint Antoni Gaudí, the patron saint of architects. A saint. The man who was left to die because 3 taxi drivers thought he was too poor to pay the fare. Hear me. Look at me. Lean forward to the screen one more time, because we are at the bottom of this story now, and I want you to take the bottom of it home with you. Open the blueprint. The 7th crease is open. The paper is fully unfolded. There is a stain on it that looks like coffee, but is not coffee. There is a pencil signature at the bottom in a slanted hand. Antoni Gaudí, 1895. I have one thing left to give you tonight. Reach into the drawer of the desk in front of me. There, the small wooden box. Open it. Inside the box is a piece of broken ceramic tile, about the size of a coin. It is white. with a fragment of green glaze. The edges are sharp, the back is rough where it was broken from a larger piece. This is a fragment from the original ceramic mosaic of the Parc Güell, broken off and carried away by a workman in 1914. This is the kind of broken tile that Antoni Gaudí used to pick up himself, in his own hands, those bent claw fingers, and press into wet plaster on his vaulted ceilings. This is the kind of broken thing that he believed was more beautiful than anything whole, because he understood all the way down that nothing in nature is whole, that everything is broken, that everything is a fragment, that the snail's shell is a fragment of a spiral, and the leaf is a fragment of a tree, and the human being is a fragment of God, and that the only honest art is the art that takes the brokenness of the world and presses it into something that bears witness to what it was and what it might still become. This piece of tile is yours now. I am giving it to you, through the screen, through the lens, through whatever distance separates this archive from the room you are sitting in tonight. This is the last thing the master touched, the last small broken piece of the world that he held in his hand and believed was beautiful. Now you hold it, and you decide what to do with it. There is one question I want you to take with you when you close this video. Just one. It is not about Antoni Gaudí, it is about you. Who in your life right now is dressed wrong? Who in your life right now is walking past you with the limp and the watery eyes and the patched coat and the head full of fig leaves and snail shells? Who in your life right now are you not recognizing? Because I will tell you the truest sentence I know, and it is the sentence Barcelona learned too late and learns again every generation and forgets every generation. The genius does not arrive announced. The genius does not arrive in good clothes. The genius arrives looking like an old man crossing the street, and the city is too busy, and the taxi drivers are too cautious, and the hospital is too crowded, and by the time anyone realizes who it was, the funeral procession is already forming. Do not be the city. Do not be the taxi driver. Do not be the ward attendant who writes anciano indigente in the ledger. Look. Slow down. Look at the people around you. The brilliant ones do not look like brilliant ones. They look like the man on the corner whose name you do not know. Recognize them while they are still alive. That is all. That is the whole lesson. That is the only thing this archive has ever wanted to tell you. Next week, I will pull a different folder from this shelf. Next week, we go to a small village in Soviet Belarus. INP is going off now. The blueprint is folding back along its 7 creases. The chip of tile is still in your hand. Do not lose it.